For 12 years, I believed I knew exactly who my wife was. Not because she was perfect, not because our marriage had been free of arguments or disappointments, but because 12 years is a long time to share a life with someone. Long enough to memorize their habits. Long enough to recognize their footsteps in a hallway. Long enough to think there are no secrets left to discover. Olivia and I had built what most people would have called a good life. We owned a 2-story house in Raleigh. We had a 14-year-old son named Ethan. We hosted family barbecues every summer. We attended school events together. From the outside, we looked like the kind of couple people expected to grow old together. That illusion survived right up until a rainy Thursday evening in October. I remember the weather because it had been raining since noon. The steady kind of rain that turns roads silver and makes the whole world feel quieter than usual. I got home earlier than expected that day. A client meeting had been canceled at the last minute. When I walked through the front door, Olivia was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She smiled when she saw me. The same smile I had seen thousands of times before. "You're home early," she said. "Meeting got canceled." She kissed my cheek and went back to chopping vegetables. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt wrong. If someone had told me that my entire life was about to change, I would have laughed. After dinner, Ethan went upstairs to finish homework. Olivia settled onto the couch beside me. We watched television, talked about weekend plans, discussed Ethan's upcoming soccer tournament. Normal things. Completely normal things. Around 9 o'clock, Olivia stood up. "I'm taking a shower." I nodded. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table and headed upstairs. 10 minutes later, I realized she had accidentally left it beside the couch. I didn't think much about it. Then the screen lit up. One message. Just one. At first, I wasn't trying to snoop. I simply glanced at the notification, the way anyone might. And that's when I saw it. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was perfect." For a second, my brain refused to process the words. It felt like reading a sentence in another language. My eyes understood it. My mind didn't. I stared at the screen. The message remained there. Unchanged. Real. My heart began to pound. Not because I understood what was happening. Because I didn't want to. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A misunderstanding. A joke. Something innocent. Anything. Then another message appeared. "I miss you already." The sender's name wasn't saved. Just a phone number. My stomach twisted. The sound of running water echoed faintly from upstairs. Olivia was still in the shower. I looked at the phone again. Then away. Then back again. Every instinct told me not to touch it. Every instinct also told me my life had just cracked open. Finally, I picked it up. My hands felt strangely cold. The phone unlocked immediately. She had never changed the passcode. She had never needed to. For 12 years, trust had been automatic. I opened the conversation. The first message was from 11 months earlier. My chest tightened. 11 months. Not 11 days. Not 11 weeks. 11 months. Nearly a year. I scrolled. Hotel reservations. Private jokes. Photos. Plans. Messages exchanged late at night while I had been asleep beside her. Messages sent during family vacations. Messages sent while she sat across from me at restaurants. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Every scroll uncovered another lie. Another hidden meeting. Another excuse that suddenly made sense. Business trips. Girls' weekends. Late work meetings. All of it carefully constructed. All of it false. I felt something strange then. Not anger. Not yet. Shock. The kind of shock that leaves a person emotionally numb. Like standing in the middle of a destroyed building and trying to remember what used to be there. I don't know how long I sat there. 10 minutes. Maybe 20. The rain continued outside. The television played quietly in the background. And my entire understanding of my marriage collapsed one message at a time. Then I found something that hurt more than the affair itself. A message sent only 3 days earlier. The man had asked her why she hadn't left me yet. Her response was short. "Because I'm waiting until everything is ready." That was it. One sentence. One sentence that destroyed every remaining illusion. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a woman struggling between two choices. This was a plan, a carefully prepared exit. Suddenly, dozens of strange moments from the past year rushed back into my memory. The unexplained withdrawals, the sudden privacy, the way she sometimes smiled at her phone, the increasing emotional distance. All the warning signs I had ignored because I trusted her, because I loved her, because I never imagined I needed to investigate my own wife. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. Immediately, I locked the phone and placed it exactly where she had left it. A minute later, she walked downstairs wearing gray sweatpants and one of my old college hoodies. She sat beside me on the couch, close enough for our shoulders to touch, close enough to feel familiar, close enough to feel like a stranger. She smiled. "Everything okay?" The question nearly broke me, because she knew exactly what she was doing, and she asked it anyway. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved for 12 years, at the woman I thought I knew. Then I forced a smile. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Everything's fine." She nodded, satisfied. A few minutes later, she rested her head against my shoulder. And for the first time in my life, I understood what betrayal actually felt like. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake staring into the darkness. The rain tapped softly against the bedroom window. I couldn't stop thinking about the messages, the lies, the plans, the future she was secretly building without me. Then, sometime after midnight, another memory surfaced. A wedding day memory. My father standing beside me, an old brass key pressed into my hand, and 6 words I had never forgotten. "Use this the day she cheats." I hadn't thought about that key in years. Now I couldn't think about anything else. And before dawn arrived, I had already made my decision. The next morning, I was going to find out what was inside box 17. The next morning, I left the house before sunrise. Olivia was still asleep. For a moment, I stood beside the bed and looked at her. 12 years. 12 years of birthdays, vacations, anniversaries, late-night conversations, and shared dreams. 12 years reduced to a collection of text messages on a phone screen. She stirred slightly beneath the blanket. I turned away. I couldn't trust myself to look any longer. Outside, the air was cold and damp from the previous night's rain. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The brass key sat in the center console. I had dug it out of an old desk drawer at 2 in the morning. It looked exactly the same as it had on my wedding day. Old, heavy, worn smooth from age. For years, I had considered throwing it away. Now it felt like the most important thing I owned. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, nearly 40 minutes away. A place I had never visited before. A place I had almost forgotten existed. My father had given me very few instructions about the key. Only one. Use this the day she cheats. Nothing more. No explanation. No details. No clues. At the time, I had assumed he was being overly cautious. My father had always been a practical man, a planner, the kind of man who carried spare batteries, extra flashlights, and backup plans for his backup plans. I figured the key was simply another example of that. Now I wasn't so sure. The storage facility appeared just after 8 o'clock. Rows of metal units stretched across several acres. The office sat near the front gate. A small brick building with faded signs and neatly trimmed hedges. I parked and walked inside. A gray-haired woman behind the counter looked up. "Can I help you?" I placed the brass key on the desk. "I'm looking for box 17. She glanced at the key, then at me. Something in her expression changed. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. She opened a file drawer and pulled out a folder. My stomach tightened. The folder already existed. Someone had been expecting this day. "Your name?" she asked. "Daniel Carter." She checked the folder, nodded, then smiled gently. "I've been told to give you access whenever you arrived." My pulse quickened. "Told by who?" She hesitated. "Your father." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. "My father passed away 6 years ago." "I know." She nodded. "He prepaid the unit for 20 years. A strange chill ran through me. 20 years. My father had planned for something he might never live to see. The woman stood. Follow me. She led me through a side door into a climate-controlled storage section. The hallway was quiet. Only the hum of fluorescent lights echoed overhead. Finally, we stopped in front of a small metal locker. Box 17. The woman pointed toward it. Take your time. Then she walked away. I stood there alone, my father's key in my hand, my heart pounding. Part of me suddenly didn't want to open it, because whatever was inside represented something uncomfortable. Proof. Proof that my father had seen something I hadn't. Proof that he had been right. Slowly, I inserted the key. The lock clicked. The sound seemed impossibly loud. I opened the door. Inside sat a single black storage case. Nothing else. No boxes. No stacks of documents. Just one case. I carried it to a nearby table and opened it. Inside were several folders, a sealed envelope, a flash drive, and a handwritten letter. The handwriting stopped me instantly. My father's handwriting. The same careful block letters I had seen my entire life. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like hearing the voice of someone who was gone. I picked up the letter. The paper was yellowing slightly with age. The date at the top caught my attention immediately. 3 weeks before my wedding. I unfolded it carefully. The first sentence hit me like a punch. If you're reading this, then the thing I feared most has happened. I sat down. My hands suddenly felt weak. The next line was even harder. And if I'm right, you're probably hurting right now. My father had written this years before it happened. Years before the betrayal. Years before the messages. Years before the lies. Yet somehow he knew. I continued reading. Son, if this letter reaches you, I need you to understand something before you read another word. Everything in this case exists because I love you. Not because I wanted to interfere in your life. Not because I wanted to control your decisions. And certainly not because I wanted to ruin your happiness. I created this file because I believed that one day you might need protection from a truth you refused to see. I swallowed hard. My father's voice echoed in every sentence.
Calm, direct,
patient. Exactly as I remembered him. The letter continued. You were in love. And love has a way of making intelligent people ignore evidence. I know because I did the same thing once. I stopped reading. That sentence surprised me. My father almost never talked about his own mistakes. Yet here he was admitting one. I kept going. 3 months before your wedding, I became aware of information that concerned me. Nothing criminal. Nothing that would have stopped the marriage. But enough to make me question the character of the woman you intended to spend your life with. My pulse quickened. The next page explained everything. My father had hired a private investigator. Not because he hated Olivia. Not because he wanted to sabotage our relationship. Because he noticed inconsistencies. Stories that didn't match. Financial details that changed depending on who was asking. Relationships that ended under suspicious circumstances. Nothing illegal. Nothing definitive. Just patterns. Patterns that bothered him. The investigator compiled everything into a report. My father included copies in the folders before me. But what shocked me most wasn't the investigation. It was what happened afterward. My father never showed me the report. Never confronted Olivia. Never objected to the wedding. Instead, he did something else. Something far more calculated. Something designed to protect me without controlling me. The final section of the letter explained it. And when I read those words, I finally understood why Box 17 existed. Why the key existed. Why my father had spent years preparing for a moment he hoped would never come. Because hidden inside those folders was a secret capable of changing everything I thought I knew about my future. And before I opened the first document, I already knew one thing. My father had been planning for this day far longer than I ever imagined. For several minutes, I simply sat there staring at my father's letter. The storage facility around me seemed to disappear. The hum of the fluorescent lights. The distant sound of a rolling door. The occasional footsteps in the hallway. None of it registered. All I could think about was one question. What exactly had my father done? Slowly, I set the letter aside and opened the first folder. Inside were legal documents, trust agreements, property records, financial statements. At first glance, they looked like the kind of paperwork most people would immediately find boring. But my father had always believed important things rarely announce themselves. The details were where the truth lived. I started reading. The deeper I went, the more confused I became. The documents weren't about Olivia. They were about me, about assets, investments, properties, accounts, all connected to my name, yet somehow completely unfamiliar. I opened another folder, then another. The picture slowly began to form. 6 months before my wedding, my father had created something called the Carter Family Preservation Trust, a legal structure designed to protect family assets across generations. At the time, I had known nothing about it. Not because it was hidden from me, because my father had deliberately chosen not to burden me with it. Instead, he appointed himself trustee, then arranged for everything to transfer to me after his death. The trust owned several assets: a lake house in western North Carolina, a parcel of commercial land outside Asheville, investment accounts, dividend-producing stocks, treasury bonds, and several long-term funds that had quietly grown for more than a decade. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. The numbers didn't seem real. The estimated value exceeded $2 million. $2 million. I read the documents again, then a third time. The math never changed. For years, I had assumed my father died with modest savings. That was the story he allowed everyone to believe. The reality was very different. My father hadn't been wealthy in the flashy sense. He didn't drive luxury cars. He didn't wear expensive watches. He didn't live in a mansion. Instead, he invested patiently, quietly, year after year. While everyone else was paying attention to appearances, he was building foundations. The realization hit me all at once. My father had spent decades creating security. Not for himself. For me. A lump formed in my throat. I picked up the next letter. This one was shorter. Only 2 pages. But every line felt deliberate. If you're reading this, then you're probably wondering why I never told you about any of this. The answer is simple. I didn't want you making life decisions based on money that wasn't earned by your own hands. I wanted you to build something yourself first. I wanted you to know who you were without a safety net. I smiled despite everything. That sounded exactly like him. When I was 16 and wanted a car, he didn't buy me one. He helped me find a job. When I graduated college, he didn't hand me money. He handed me advice. When I started my business, he didn't offer shortcuts. He offered encouragement. His philosophy had always been the same. Build your own foundation, then strengthen it. Never replace it. I continued reading. If Olivia proves me wrong, wonderful. Then none of this matters. You'll spend your life with a woman who loves you for who you are. And this trust will simply become part of your future together. But if she proves me right, I need you to remember something. The next sentence stopped me cold. The most dangerous people are not the ones who openly take from you. The dangerous ones are the people who quietly position themselves to benefit from your trust. I stared at the words. Suddenly, the messages on Olivia's phone flashed through my mind. The lies. The secret meetings. The year-long affair. The carefully planned exit. Everything looked different now. Not because I hated her. Because I could finally see the situation clearly. For nearly 12 years, I had viewed my marriage through the lens of loyalty. I assumed Olivia saw it the same way. Now I wasn't sure she ever had. I opened the flash drive. The storage office had a small computer available for customers. I inserted it. A collection of files appeared. Most were scans of financial records, investment performance reports, legal correspondence, trust documentation. Then I noticed a video file. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 4 months before my father's death. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked play. The screen flickered, and suddenly there he was. Older than I remembered. Thinner. Gray-haired, but unmistakably my father. He sat in his favorite chair on the back porch. The same chair that had overlooked the river for 20 years. For several seconds, he simply looked into the camera. Then he smiled. "Well," he said, If you're watching this, I was probably right. I laughed despite myself. Tears immediately filled my eyes. It had been 6 years since I'd heard his voice. 6 years. And somehow hearing it again hurt more than I expected. He leaned forward. Son, if you've reached this point, then things didn't work out the way you hoped. His voice remained calm, steady.
Certain.
Exactly as it always had been. I wish I could tell you that pain gets easier overnight. He shook his head. It doesn't. Then he smiled slightly. But I can tell you something else. He pointed directly toward the camera. You're stronger than you think. I swallowed hard. The room suddenly felt too small.
Too quiet.
He continued. Whatever happened, don't let it turn you bitter. Don't spend years carrying someone else's mistakes. Don't let betrayal become your identity. He paused, looking directly into the camera, looking directly at me. Then came the words I would remember for the rest of my life. The goal isn't to win against someone who hurt you. The goal is to build a life so strong their absence no longer matters. Silence filled the room. The video ended a few moments later. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the blank screen, thinking, not about revenge, not about Olivia, not even about the money. I was thinking about my father, about how carefully he had prepared for a future he might never see, about how much he loved me, about how far ahead he had been thinking. For the first time since discovering the affair, the crushing weight inside my chest began to ease. The pain was still there. The betrayal was still real. But something had changed. I no longer felt helpless. I no longer felt blindsided. And most importantly, I no longer felt afraid of what came next. Because hidden inside Box 17 wasn't just money. It wasn't just property. It wasn't even protection. It was perspective. And as I packed the documents back into the case, I realized something that hadn't occurred to me before. My father hadn't given me that key to save my future. He had given me that key to save my judgment. And now, for the first time since that message appeared on Olivia's phone, I was finally ready to decide what happened next. The day after I left the storage facility, I stopped thinking like a husband and started thinking like a man preparing for a storm. My father had spent years teaching me that emotions were important, but decisions made entirely from emotion usually ended badly. So instead of confronting Olivia, I did something she never expected. I prepared. For the next 3 weeks, I acted exactly the same. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner with my family. I attended Ethan's soccer games. I smiled when appropriate. I listened when spoken to. And all the while I watched. The strange thing about deception is that once you know it exists, it becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, things I had overlooked for months became obvious. The way Olivia angled her phone away from me. The way she smiled at messages she never explained. The way she volunteered information before I asked questions. People who tell the truth usually answer questions. People who lie often prepare answers in advance. I noticed everything. And I documented everything. My attorney's name was Rebecca Sloan. She had practiced family law for nearly 25 years. After reviewing the evidence from Olivia's phone and the documents from Box 17, she gave me one piece of advice. Don't interrupt someone while they're making a mistake. I never forgot that sentence. Because Olivia was making mistakes almost daily. She just didn't know anyone was keeping score. The first major discovery came from our joint accounts. Rebecca hired a forensic accountant. Within 10 days, they identified a pattern. Small transfers. Carefully hidden. Never large enough to attract attention. Never obvious enough to trigger suspicion. Over 11 months, those small transfers totaled nearly $90,000. $90,000. The money had moved through multiple accounts before eventually landing in an account registered solely under Olivia's name. The account had never appeared on our financial disclosures. It had never been mentioned during tax preparation. It had never been disclosed to me. That omission alone created serious legal problems. But things were about to get worse. Much worse. A private investigator Rebecca hired eventually identified the man from the messages. His name was Trevor Lang, 43 years old, divorced twice, self-described entrepreneur, professional charmer, the kind of man who always looked successful from a distance. The closer you got, the less impressive the reality became. The investigators' report painted a very different picture. Trevor rented a luxury apartment he couldn't afford, drove a leased BMW, carried significant personal debt, had multiple failed business ventures, and, perhaps most importantly, he had a long history of becoming involved with married women. That detail caught Rebecca's attention immediately. "This isn't his first performance," she told me. Performance. The word fit perfectly, because Trevor seemed less interested in relationships and more interested in opportunities. The deeper we dug, the clearer the pattern became. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, luxury gifts, hotel stays. Many of them funded indirectly through money Olivia had transferred from our accounts. In effect, she had been using marital assets to finance the affair. That mattered legally.
A lot.
Still, I said nothing. I confronted no one. I waited, because preparation was working. Every day produced new information. Every week strengthened the case. Then everything changed. One afternoon, Rebecca called me personally. Her voice sounded different, more serious than usual. "I think you're going to want to sit down." I was already sitting. "What's happened?" There was a brief pause. Then she said, "We found the apartment lease." At first, I didn't understand. Then she continued, "Trevor and Olivia signed a lease agreement together." My stomach tightened.
When?
4 months ago. For months. That meant they had been planning their future together long before I discovered the affair. Long before the messages. Long before the lies unraveled. The move had already been arranged. Furniture purchased. Deposits paid. Utilities scheduled. They weren't discussing a future. They had already built one. At least they thought they had. The discovery should have made me angry. Oddly enough, it didn't. Instead, it gave me clarity. For months I had been wondering whether Olivia was confused, whether she was struggling, whether she was caught between two lives. The lease answered those questions.
No.
She had chosen.
Completely.
Deliberately. Months ago. And knowing that brought a strange sense of peace. Because uncertainty finally disappeared. The following month, Rebecca filed. The legal response was comprehensive. Every hidden transfer documented. Every account identified. Every financial discrepancy highlighted. The filing was nearly 200 pages long. When Olivia received it, I was sitting in my office reviewing project plans. She called 11 times in less than an hour. I didn't answer. Then came the text. "We need to talk.
Please call me."
"This isn't what you think. Daniel, please." I ignored every message. Not because I hated her. Because there was nothing left to discuss. The truth had already spoken. A week later came the first settlement meeting. It lasted less than 2 hours. Olivia arrived confident. She left pale. By the second meeting, confidence had disappeared entirely. The hidden account had been exposed. The transfers had been traced. The financial records had been verified. The lease agreement had been introduced. And Trevor's involvement was now part of the official record. Reality was beginning to replace fantasy. Then came the final blow. Trevor vanished. Not literally, but emotionally, financially,
practically.
Once legal complications appeared, his enthusiasm disappeared almost overnight. The romantic future he had promised suddenly became negotiable, then uncertain, then non-existent. By the time summer arrived, the relationship had collapsed completely. The man who promised Olivia a better life had quietly stepped away when that life became complicated. I wasn't surprised. People reveal who they are when circumstances stop benefiting them. My father used to say that character isn't visible during easy seasons. Character becomes visible during storms. Trevor had failed the test quickly. The divorce proceedings continued. Evidence accumulated. Facts replaced stories. And little by little, the life Olivia had carefully constructed began collapsing under its own weight. Not because I destroyed it, because it had never been built on anything solid in the first place. And for the first time since opening that message on her phone, I realized something important. The affair wasn't actually the thing that ended my marriage. The affair was simply the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. And the truth was this. The woman I loved had been gone long before I discovered the messages. I just hadn't. 8 months later, the divorce was final. The papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. No dramatic courtroom battle. No last-minute surprises. No emotional speeches. Just signatures.
Dates.
Legal language. And the quiet ending of 12 years. I sat alone in my office after reading the final page. For a long moment, I simply stared out the window. The strange thing about pain is that people expect it to arrive all at once, like a lightning strike. But most of the time, pain leaves the same way it arrives. Gradually.
One small piece at a time.
By the day the divorce became official, I had already spent months letting go. The man who discovered those messages on Olivia's phone was not the same man sitting in that office. That man had been shocked, confused, heartbroken. This version of me was something different. Not healed, not completely, but stronger, clearer, calmer. The legal settlement ended almost exactly the way Rebecca predicted. The hidden funds were recovered. The undisclosed account became part of the official record. The financial transfers were documented. Every decision Olivia had made during the affair had consequences. Not because I wanted revenge, because actions create outcomes. That's how life works. The trust my father created remained protected exactly as intended. The lake house, the investment accounts, the land, everything remained untouched. The more I learned about the trust, the more I understood what my father had actually built. He hadn't created wealth. He had created security. There was a difference. Money can disappear. Security stays. That realization changed the way I viewed everything, including myself. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Ethan spent the weekend with friends. For the first time in months, the house was completely quiet. No television. No conversations. No obligations. Just silence. I made coffee and carried it onto the back porch. The autumn air was cool. The trees were beginning to change color. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something I hadn't expected.
Peace.
Not happiness. Not excitement.
Peace.
The kind that comes after surviving something difficult. The kind that comes when uncertainty finally ends. My phone rang around 6 o'clock that evening. The caller ID showed Olivia's name. I stared at it for several seconds, then answered. Hello. There was silence on the other end. Finally, she spoke. Can I see you? Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow. I closed my eyes briefly. Part of me had known this moment would eventually come. Not because I was special, not because she loved me, because reality had finally caught up with fantasy. When? I asked. Today. I looked out across the yard. The setting sun painted long shadows across the grass. Okay. An hour later, she arrived. She stepped out of her car slowly. For a moment, I barely recognized her. Not because she looked older, because she looked tired. The confidence I had known for years seemed gone. The certainty, the self-assurance, the careful control, all of it had disappeared. She stood on the porch, while I remained near the doorway. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked down, then back up. Tears filled her eyes. I made a mistake. The words hung in the air between us. Simple words. Heavy words. Words she probably practiced before arriving. I listened quietly. She continued. I thought I knew what I wanted. Her voice cracked. I thought I understood everything. The tears came freely now. I was wrong. I said nothing. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because there wasn't much left to say. She looked at me. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time in years. I lost everything. The statement wasn't entirely true. She still had her health, her career, her future. But I understood what she meant. The life she expected had disappeared. The future she imagined had collapsed. And now she was standing in front of the man she once believed would always be there. Waiting. Hoping. Maybe even expecting forgiveness. Finally, she asked the question. Is there any chance? Her voice faded. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I already knew. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I thought about my father. The brass key. Box 17.
The trust.
The letters. The video. Everything he had done. Everything he had prepared. And suddenly I understood something I hadn't fully understood before. The greatest gift he left me wasn't the money. It wasn't the property. It wasn't even the protection. It was perspective. He gave me the ability to see clearly when emotions tried to blind me. He gave me the ability to separate love from judgment. And most importantly, he gave me the ability to walk away when walking away became necessary. I took a slow breath. Then I spoke. The greatest gift my father ever gave me wasn't what's inside box 17. Olivia looked up.
Confused.
I continued. It was the warning. A tear rolled down her cheek. I wasn't angry. I truly wasn't. Anger had left months ago. What remained was acceptance. I hope you find happiness, Olivia. My voice was calm.
Honest.
I really do. She lowered her head, because she already knew what was coming next. But it won't be here. Silence. The evening breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The world continued exactly as it always had. Olivia wiped her eyes, then nodded.
Slowly.
Painfully. The way people nod when they finally accept a truth they've been avoiding. She turned, walked down the porch steps, opened her car door, and drove away. This time, neither of us looked back. I stood there until the taillights disappeared. Then I went inside. Later that night, I opened the small fireproof box where I kept my father's letters. I read them again, especially the final line from the video. The line that had carried me through the hardest months of my life. The goal isn't to win against someone who hurt you. The goal is to build a life so strong their absence no longer matters. I smiled, because for the first time, I truly understood what he meant. The next morning, I drove to the lake house. The sun rose over the water. The surface of the lake shimmered in the early light. I sat on the dock with a cup of coffee and watched the day begin. No anger, no regret, no bitterness, just gratitude. For my father, for the lesson, for the warning, and for the simple truth that had taken me 12 years to learn. Some gifts aren't meant to protect your heart. They're meant to protect your future. And thanks to a brass key given to me on my wedding day, mine was finally free. Now not yet.